Tony, a lot of our customers that think they're interested in making a timberland investment, of course, are very light in their knowledge about what we do and how to evaluate a timberland investment. The components of value, bare land, timber, pre-merchant, those kinds of things are something that most of our clients wouldn't understand until we can evaluate it for them and explain it to them.
Well, exactly. Timberland is a little bit different animal when it comes to a real estate investment. There are certain things that you have to look at to analyze its value and those components of value. Right off the top, you need to know how much merchantable timber is on the property. That's usually obtained through a timber cruise that's done by foresters, and it tells you how much merchantable timber is on the property that could be harvested and generate revenue. Beyond that, there's pre-merchantable timber that is typically planted pine that's too young to harvest, but it represents value in that it represents an income stream because it can be harvested in the future. You have to have a way of analyzing that, quantifying that, and coming up with the value of what the pre-merchantable timber is worth. Other components that are important to consider is the percentage of plantable or percentage of upland versus a percentage of non-plantable or wetland. Both components have value, but it's different. A typical timberland tract, you're going to put as much as twice the value on the upland or the plantable acreage as you would on the non-plantable acreage. You have to know those percentages. You have to have it mapped out well and understand where the trees can be planted and managed, and where you have to rely on natural silviculture to produce timber, and which at a lower value. Other things that need to be considered is there potential for pine straw production. Can revenue be generated from that? What is the potential for for investors who do not plan to use a property for their own recreational use? What's the potential for hunting lease revenue on that property? And you can go all the way down to other income streams that would require some development, but may be possible. Go for mitigation sites, wetland mitigation banks, those kind of things that you need to analyze for their potential. And then ultimately, you need to look at the property and decide, is there some use conversion that might be in the near future or the distant future, that the property might transition into another use, and there may be some upside in increase in value because of a transition into commercial agriculture or some other use that might generate more value to the property. So a lot of things to look at. A certain amount of and specific expertise to study those things, analyze them, quantify them in a financial sense, and then come up with a value of what is that property actually worth in the market to a buyer or to the seller, depending on which one we're working for.
Well, we have the ability to analyze these tracts in that way. I mean, we've had a lot of success in the recent years of converting some of our timberland into environmentally sensitive acquisitions by the state of Florida. Florida leads the nation in acquisition of environmentally sensitive lands through many different programs, but the advent of the conservation easement acquisitions by the state of Florida has been just a phenomenal benefit to a lot of our clients. And we have put conservation easements, and they're usually perpetual, on a lot of our properties that have really made their timberland investment then work. So having the ability to look at these tracts, assess the appropriateness of them as being environmentally important, either through mitigation banking or conservation easements or whatever, brings a lot of other opportunities to our investors that they probably would not know about themselves.
Yeah, and on the other side of that is listing properties that are encumbered by conservation easements and that already have that. We have experience with that, and recent experience selling properties that were encumbered by conservation easement. You need to know how to talk to buyers about that and explain it to them and get them comfortable with what that means to them if they purchase that property, and understand the terms of an easement and how that would work. So when we list properties with a conservation easement already on it, those are very marketable properties, but it takes a certain amount of expertise there too to be able to explain that and relate that to potential buyers in a way that they understand the property, understand the easement, and feel comfortable making that purchase. It's a challenge, but it's one that we've met and we're ready for.
This particular property does have a conservation easement on it as well as a mitigation bank. And when you put a conservation easement on a piece of property, of course you're receiving revenue and you've probably devalued the resale value for a while. But what we've noticed, especially as you get closer to metropolitan areas, that value starts climbing back up. And ultimately, there's somebody that's going to want the property and pay prices that probably 10 years ago you wouldn't have even thought would have been possible.
Yeah, that's right. And if the property meets the criteria of that buyer, if it's going to serve their purpose with the conservation easement on it, then the effect of the value to that particular buyer is not that dramatic. It still is a property they can use for what they desire. And plus, if there's a mitigation bank or go for tourist recipient site, it generates revenue. There's income there that it could be important to that investor as well, that offsets the fact that it's not developable.
And one thing that most people don't realize, a conservation easement certainly is an encumbrance, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't encumber that much. This particular property, we have no restrictions on what we can do in the way of managing and harvesting uplands timber. So our timber revenue continues unabated. And of course, the conservation easement does encumber the property and does go with the title of the property, but ultimately, if we wanted to sell this property to somebody in Tampa, this property would go real quick at a price that probably would be very attractive to the landowner if he wanted to sell.
I don't doubt that.